All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lauren Clark. I am with the Scranton Area Community Foundation, responsible for the NEPA Thrives initiative. I'm excited to have you all here today. Carrie, can we pull up the gallery right now? So excited to have you all here. Thank you for joining us this morning. You have joined our part two of the kickoff of our Workforce Barrier Summit. Um, Back in 2024, the Secretary of Labor and Industry for Pennsylvania came and spoke about the four major barriers to workforce development, being transportation, childcare, affordable housing, and broadband. And through our work at the Scranton Area Foundation, we've had multiple conversations across industry, local government, education, nonprofits and for-profits, and this is what the fruition of those events are. So, over the next several weeks, we'll be doing a weekly Zoom to highlight one of those barriers, but also some of the stuff that's already going on in the community that are support mechanisms for individuals, families, and employers throughout the region. And it will culminate on May 1st with an in-person presentation and collaboration at Benco Dental in Pittston, PA. And so I hope that you will join us for as many of these sessions as possible. And if you miss one, they will be put on our website and our YouTube account so that you can watch the recorded sessions. And with that, I'm going to start by asking if everyone who's participating today can put in the chat your name, the first job that you have ever had, and then what do you do now? And so, for example, my name is Corin, and the first job I have was a babysitter, and now I work in community engagement. And if you don't remember the first job you had, think about the second. Couple of fellow babysitters out there, I see. Oh, that's fun. A lot of babysitters, cashiers, couple of restaurants, family business. Awesome. Excellent. So we will come back to this and why this is important. But with that, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce to you Jill Avery Stoss, the president of the Institute, who's going to be sharing some really interesting data on workforce barriers throughout the region. And I hope that you enjoy it. Jill?
Thank you, Corin. Good morning, everyone. Um, Again, my name's Jill. I'm president at the Institute. I'm going to get started by explaining a little bit about who we are and what we do, just in case any of you are not familiar with us. We are a nonprofit, and we operate as a partnership of 14 of the region's colleges and universities. We're also supported by some very generous friends in business, industry, and philanthropy, and we offer data analytics and community-based research. So things like program evaluations and strategic planning support, market and feasibility studies, economic impact, wage analysis, and such. And then on our next slide, there is just kind of our overview. Our mission is to facilitate data-driven insights for the purpose of improving economic well-being and quality of life throughout Northeastern Pennsylvania. And that brings me to the reason I'm here with you this morning. And if any of you were present during our session, I think it was last week, this will be kind of a recap of what was addressed there as well. So it'll be familiar. but I appreciate your patience and bearing with me here. I'd like to share some general information about the region's workforce, what's been happening, what the trends look like, and what we might expect to see in the future, considering some of the challenges that are in our way at the moment. Um, and two quick sort of precursors to that, when I refer to the region or to NEPA or Northeastern PA, I'm talking about Lackawanna, Luzerne, and the surrounding counties this morning. And I'll bring up COVID quite a bit, but when I do that, I just want to make the distinction that I'm not necessarily identifying COVID as the cause of any of the challenges. These were all problematic before COVID even hit us, and so they were just exacerbated by the pandemic. So this here is just some general industry related information about the region. If you're able to see the little gray lines there, they represent national averages. And then the blue lines are Pennsylvania, northeastern Pennsylvania. So you can see where we are above and below average, way above in terms of healthcare and social assistance, big in retail, manufacturing, and definitely transportation and warehousing, as well as education. And once again, I want to give a shout out to the forestry, fishing, hunting, and agriculture sector. They are very small, but it's looking like they're pretty mighty. They're growing at a faster rate than many of our other industries. So kudos to them. And where we are falling above or below here is not necessarily an indicator of good or bad. It's just kind of where we are. And in general, we are a pretty fairly diverse economy. So that's a good thing. Since we have strengths in multiple sectors, that indicates that we are somewhat resilient. So if one particular sector suffers or is threatened in some way, we have others that we can rely on to stay robust. And then on our next slide, we have some occupation characteristics. And again, we're way above average in terms of transportation and material moving, production, healthcare, and some other areas. And I'm going to circle back to these towards the end of my conversation to dive a little bit deeper into what the forecasts are looking at and some entry points. So we can step ahead, and on the next slide, I have just a small list of bulleted challenges that is certainly not all inclusive by any means. These are some challenges that we hear about in terms of being particularly pervasive. So I'll take a few minutes and expand on each of them, and then we can certainly jump in with conversation or questions at any point as time allows. So starting with demographics on the next slide, we do have an aging population, meaning that a substantial share of our population is on the older end. And there are not enough people then on the younger end to fill positions as some of those older folks retire. So in other words, we do have high retirement risk. It's really a numbers kind of thing. And we also have a significant portion of what some people call opportunity youth, some others call them disconnected youth. There's a couple of different terms that are used, but nonetheless, these are individuals who are age 16 to 24 years old, and they are either underemployed or unemployed or haven't completed sufficient education, and therefore they're kind of struggling in the workforce or to maintain employment. So because of those shifting aging dynamics, these people in our younger age group are really very much needed to help us move into the right direction. And there's a lot of potential for engagement there. And more generally about the regional demographics, there is some fluctuation depending on the county, but overall the region has not seen too much population loss. And that's not really due to natural population change or anything. It's not that births are outnumbering deaths necessarily. It's because of in-migration. We're seeing new residents come from other parts of Pennsylvania, other states, other countries, and that's not at all a bad thing. We need to kind of continue to work on accommodating this in migration. Um, for example, it does mean that there are some language barriers. So people who are speaking languages other than English maybe don't necessarily have equitable access to all of the education and employment resources that might be available. So there's also some room for growth there. We've also learned that licensed or otherwise credentialed professionals who move into the state or even from other states from who move into Pennsylvania from either other states or other countries are sometimes facing challenges because their licensure is not always recognized here. It's big in the healthcare sector, but it's not limited to healthcare. It's common in other areas as well. So we have professionals who are in good standing in their practice areas, but they simply cannot practice here without re-enrolling in school or something. So that's not always feasible financially or otherwise. And we have regions too across the nation that are facing workforce challenges. We are certainly not alone. So that means we're competing with the rest of the country. Everyone from coast to coast is desperate to attract and retain people. And for this reason, it's really important to highlight how everything is interconnected in terms of the ecosystem in our region. To be able to attract people and keep them, we have to think about attainable and affordable housing and even entertainment and recreation and infrastructure and all of those things. So back one slide is our transportation challenge. I'm certain this is not going to come as much of a shock to anybody. I know it's been a thing for a long time and it's an ongoing challenge. It has gotten better. There are plenty of really good programs and initiatives in place to mitigate the issue. It's just that it is a really persistent issue. And so as terms of attracting and retaining people and thinking about the whole ecosystem, transportation is a key component of that. Bus routes, for example, do not always cover complete trips, whether within neighborhoods or residential areas or employment centers or industrial parks. A lot of these places are not even really walkable once people do disembark from transit. Routes are limited in terms of scheduling, which is super challenging because many of our big industries involve shift work or off hours work. So warehousing, manufacturing, healthcare. We have our people are working around the clock, but the buses are not. And I think that the bus thing or the public transit challenge sometimes overshadows challenges people have with their own personal vehicles. In many cases, most of our residents do have their own cars, but in many cases, these vehicles must be shared with other members of the household. There are significant costs associated with care and maintenance. We hear about lots of people who are driving uninspected vehicles or bad brakes or things like that hinder their reliability, which then leads to call-offs and employee turnover. And I know it goes without saying, but just to say it anyway, these dynamics are particularly prohibitive for people who live in rural areas. So next slide, we begin with the housing end of things. This is another challenge that was in place prior to COVID, and it's gotten exponentially worse since 2020. I mentioned that we've had a lot of in-migration, which is great for the workforce, but the housing stock that we have in the region is insufficient. During those lockdowns, a lot of people moved into the area, which drove prices upward on top of an already limited supply and on top of all of the other inflated costs that we had seen. So there's a multi-layer issue there. On the next slide, the same thing, you can see the same thing happened with rent. They followed the same trend. Renters do tend to be more housing insecure than homeowners. And housing insecurity occurs when more than 30% of household income must be allocated to housing costs. So you can see there we're hovering right around that line, depending on the county. And research tells us that housing insecurity very much adversely affects academic performance in students and workplace performance amongst workers. So, and it's a social determinant of health and an indicator of economic vitality. So, really important all around. On our next housing slide, we look at age. We don't just have a limited housing supply. We also have a very old one. We're not in the best position in terms of new development. Substantial shares have been built prior to 1940, although Pike County there is a bit of an outlier. They've had some more recent activity, and there's many reasons for the lack of development, but as an example, zoning challenges are pretty significant. There are many contradictions and complexities with ordinances, and they don't leave a whole lot of incentive for developers to build unless they're building luxury housing because they can turn a better profit that way. In Luzerne County, for example, there are 76 municipalities, many of which have their own ordinances, and somewhere around 20 do not. They just fall under the county's ordinance. So that I think is about 56 or 57 different ordinances in one county alone that developers have to navigate before they even think about building. They all use different naming conventions, and what is allowable in one zone may not be allowable in another, even if the names are the same. It's kind of convoluted. Okay, so that's housing. And before I jump into the childcare piece of things, do we need to stop for a breather or any questions or comments or anything like that? Or should I plug along?
Feel
Good?
free to put questions in the chat.
Yeah.
Is
Yep.
any of this
Okay.
information surprising or not what other people are seeing?
Okay.
Thank you,
Okay,
Nikki.
cool. All right, so then I'll jump back in and talk childcare for a minute. Um, Similar to the healthcare sector, that there was already an imbalance in terms of supply and demand in childcare, even before the pandemic. Wages for childcare workers are often on the lower end of the spectrum, so that heightens competition with other industries that can pay more. So there's that challenge there. And then during the pandemic, the childcare sector got just completely decimated. They really had a hard time reopening at the same rate that other businesses were able to reopen. And the ones that did survive continued to operate, but they did so with very severe staffing issues. So they were limited in terms of capacity. Um, and that added then to wait lists and so forth. And then another layer to this childcare challenge is that childcare workers and caregiving occupations in general are quite gendered. So they're often filled by women, and women have had a more difficult time re-entering the workforce after COVID because they are also often the primary caregivers at home. So that means they haven't been able to very easily re-enter the workforce due to long waiting lists and high costs for care, which are resulting from that demand. It's kind of a childcare paradox that's happening. And then on our next slide here, this is national data, and it covers people who are working, who have been able to maintain some employment. Maybe they've managed to find some sort of childcare, even if it's more informal. But the challenges of when children are sick or their babysitters have fallen through, their plans aren't working out, that is kind of interrupting their employment. And it's not just costing families, of course, as you're well aware. absenteeism in the workplace is super expensive. So that's interfering with performance and productivity, not just in homes, but in communities and the broader economy. So that's leading to turnover and rehiring and training, also very expensive. And then on the next slide, we're going to zoom back in, and this is more localized data covering the 8th congressional district. So that's Lackawanna, Luzerne, Monroe, Pike, and Wayne counties. This comes from a child care study we completed maybe a little over a year ago. And it illustrates responses to a parent survey that we did. Now, the sample size for this was pretty small. So we want to kind of interpret it with caution, but I do think it's noteworthy that all of the data that's reported here comes from parents who work traditional hours only. So, and they're already reporting difficulties. So I think it's safe to make the assumption that those who are working non-traditional schedules are probably struggling a whole lot more. We do have some daycare opportunity or childcare opportunities that operate during the off hours, but by no means can they accommodate the need. Okay, and then on the next slide, this one is a very busy slide that you're going to see, and that's why there's a QR code in case you'd like to dive a little deeper. But the important thing to look at are the child care costs. They range from 10% to 16% of family income, and that's on top of that 28 or 29% for housing that I mentioned earlier. So for many families, just in those two areas, we're talking about 40% or 50% of their income. And that's not including transportation costs or healthcare or food, obviously hugely expensive, or any kind of fun. So all of these things contribute to a scarcity mindset. So I'll touch on that in a moment. On our next slide, we do have evidence that there's good ROI, good returns associated with employer-supported childcare. Some successful case studies are out there of mid-size and larger organizations that have some care partnerships or in-house care programs that have looked beneficial. And from those, every $3 or $4 that are invested, no, I should say there's returns of every $3 or $4 for every $1 that's invested. So viable solutions. And on our next slide, I'm not sure actually what comes next. Okay. Before I shift places here to what the workforce looks like, I think I would be remiss in not discussing physical and mental health access as a challenge. We know that people can't work or work well if they're not healthy, which is difficult to do when care is limited by shortages and cost as well. Mental health issues elevated during COVID, and the healthcare workforce itself has struggled with stress and burnout. So there's an added layer of mental health challenge within that too. It's another multifaceted dynamic. Frontline workers are often choosing to leave their occupations in favor of their own, well-being and self-care needs. So that's kind of another hit to the landscape. And one other challenge that I want to address that was not on my little bulleted list earlier, so I apologize, but it is important to think about scarcity, which really is just a lack of something, whether that's transportation or emotional support or food or childcare, housing, income. It's all a type of trauma that leaves little mental capacity or bandwidth for people to be really productive or to perform as well as they maybe can. They're more focused on day-to-day needs and basic survival than completing other tasks at work. It affects their executive functioning. So things like emotional regulation and memory, organization, time management, all things that, of course, are very important in the workplace. Okay, so if we're thinking about who is and isn't working, we can look at labor force and unemployment rates. Um, and to clarify, the labor force I'm talking about, that's consisting of anybody who is working or is attempting to work, or looking for a job, or maybe between jobs. It's not just a count of the population that's working age. So it does not include people who are disabled or retired or students or homemakers. But that said, the labor force participation by age is pretty decent. Um, Unemployment calculated by is not, I'm sorry, to clarify, the unemployment rate is calculated not based on the whole population as well. It's based on the number of people who are in the labor force. So we see that unemployment is particularly high among those 16 to 24-year-olds that I mentioned. And again, so because of the way the rate is calculated with the labor force, these are not 16 to 24-year-olds who are in high school or college or um, maybe trying to maintain some employment. They simply are attempting to, but for whatever reason are struggling with that. On the next slide, we can see that there are some disparities in terms of race and ethnicity. The labor force participation among Native Hawaiians and that vague two or more races category that the federal government uses, that labor force participation is great, but they also have high rates of unemployment. And also, however, the Native Hawaiian population and the Alaska Native populations are quite small in this area. So we need to be careful about drawing conclusions with those. But our population of people of two or more races is not. So that's still pretty significant. The high employment rate suggests that maybe they are trying to find and maintain work, but there are obstacles preventing them from doing so. And conversely, the Black and African American population group has a low labor force rate, but there's also a low unemployment rate. So that's great for when they secure employment, but there's something getting in the way of many of them entering the workforce in the first place.
Jill, can you clarify something?
Mhm. Sure.
So, with the average labor force participation rate, how is that calculated? Because I think it's important for those participating to understand um, where those numbers are coming from.
Mhm.
So could you just share that?
Yes, they begin with the overall number of the working age population, 16 to 64. And then the Bureau of Labor Statistics gathers counts of people who are either attempting to work, looking for a job, um, or who are actively working. And they are not counting people who are maybe stay-at-home parents, who are retired, who are not working because they are disabled. So people who essentially are opting into the labor force, who are choosing to be involved in some way. And it is that number calculated based on the working age population. And then the unemployment rate comes from that labor force
S-
participation.
All right. So in that, looking at that category of youth, there's a chance that they're not out looking for positions and maybe living at home, um, and actually have the ability to get out. So we might be missing a numbers based on that information as well. There may be more able bodies um, than what the numbers are showing. Is that a fair assumption?
It is fair, especially among the 16 to 19-year-olds, I guess, but the 20 to 24-year-olds, that 75% there who are participating, is it's not insignificant.
Right. And these are NEPA
So
numbers
mhm,
specifically?
correct. Yes. Any other questions before I jump ahead?
Uh, amongst industry growth, which industries have the most open available positions? We are going to get there, Dave.
Yeah, we are. I think about two more slides. Um, and then actually this slide is super quick. It's all pretty logical. As you might expect, higher levels of education are connected to higher rates of labor force participation and lower unemployment rates. So I think that one's pretty straightforward. And then on our next slide, yes, this is the one, and I apologize if it's tiny, but this is a more detailed breakdown of the top occupations that I mentioned earlier. And looking at those 2034 numbers in red, those growth projections, it's going to look at first glance as if we see some decline over the next decade. And that means that the growth will decline, the change in the number of jobs created will decline, but it does not account for the retirement risk or the need to fill positions that are staffed right now, but will soon be available when people retire. So it doesn't necessarily paint the full picture, but it is helpful for understanding the sheer volume of jobs that are available. And these are just the top 20 occupations. I can certainly share an entire list if you'd like, following the conversation. It would definitely not be visible on a slide, though, if I tried to put it here. But also what is noteworthy about this slide is that the vast majority of these top 20 occupations are fitting entry points into the workforce. So not all of them, but most of them don't require extensive higher education experience or even work experience to access them right away. And there are pathways. They act as entry points into broader career pathways. For example, let's see, the laborers and material movers there at the top, they might be able to start their careers at that point, but they also might have been previously stockers or order fillers and then have transitioned into those material moving roles. And then with some experience there, they would be better equipped to transition into the industrial truck or tractor operators that are down on that list too. And there's a similar concept for home health and personal care aides, also entry-level positions, but with some extra skills that they can acquire and then education, they could be positioned to become nursing assistants, LPNs, and then that would put them on the path toward the registered nursing, which is also on our list too. I think it's maybe number 9 or so in terms of demand. And then similarly, fast food and counter workers, they might be able to move on to become like servers or food service management workers, retail sales. People can move into supervision or merchandising and so forth. So there's different points throughout different career pathways where people can enter and exit the workforce, but a lot of these are big in-demand ones are very well situated for people who are just getting started. And I think that might wrap up my piece of things, unless I don't know if we have time in the agenda or if we want to circle back, but we can talk about any challenges or other questions, or maybe you all have solutions to share. We can go from there.
Please feel free to put any comments or come off of mute um, in the chat. Is anything, we asked if it was shocking, but in that, is this what you are seeing in your fields and within your employment or the work that you're doing with individuals? Is this re replicating what you are seeing in the day to day? Thumbs up, head nods.
I was just gonna say, I'm with Geisinger and I support nursing support recruitment. So very entry level roles. They just require a high school diploma. And I would say that childcare and transportation especially ring very, very true. From my experience.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or questions for Jill? Thank you, Kristen. All right. Well, with that, I will hand it over to Carrie.
Thank you, Corin. Okay. Let me just get my screen up here. Pardon me while I double duty. Okay. All right. Everyone see my screen? Yeah? Okay, great. Thanks,
Yep,
everyone.
you're good.
Thanks, Corin. Hi, everybody. Good morning. You probably had an early start to your day coming on here, so if you didn't get a chance to get your coffee, I'll try to energize you a little bit. My name's Carrie Fallhaber. I'm the Senior Vice President of Jobs First NYC, and I have spent the past 15 years of my career at Workforce Intermediaries, which Jobs First NYC is a workforce intermediary in New York. I'll tell you a little bit more about them in a second. Just a little bit about me. You saw in chat maybe that I started my first job as a babysitter and a restaurant hostess. And then I worked a number of jobs, including retail, family business. Um, I probably have worked in 7 different sectors of industry sectors of the economy. And I had a 10-year career in film and television, post-production and production before coming into the nonprofit world. And I've had the privilege of spending some time in NEPA the past year, and I'm really thrilled to be here with you all and co-host this session with NEPA Thrives today. So enough about me. In this session, we're focused on sector-focused collaborations, knowing that they can address barriers to recruitment, and particularly looking at some of the data that Jill shared. I want you to keep that all in mind. And even thinking about just your own work journey. You heard mine was very winding. It wasn't a direct career path. And maybe the same is true for some of you based on where you started and where you are now, and thinking about, how you got there. And maybe what level of privilege you did or didn't have in education and family supports and all the things that helped you get to where you are now. And thinking about the populations that Jill highlighted that might not be in that circumstance. And so we're going to look at some models and approaches of sector and industry-based partnerships that have had good outcomes to spur some thinking for you all. I'd love it to be as interactive as possible. So anytime you have questions, drop them in chat, come off mute. But really think about, how you discovered the things that you're doing now and the support and guidance that you had. So just quickly about Jobs First NYC. You see here our vision is economic mobility for all young adults, and my colleague Stephanie will tell you more about how we do our work. But just wanted to share a slide that shows probably some similarities to your region. This is New York City out of school, out of work young adults. And when Jobs First was launched in 2006, which is even earlier than this first bar chart here, and we had higher rates of out of school of work young adults, over 200,000 in New York City, the size of some small cities. And Jobs First was formed because of that. The local nonprofits, philanthropy, the community that supports young adults to achieve economic mobility thought that some mechanism needed to stay focused on this issue if we were really going to have an impact. And over time, lots of different circumstances contribute to more young adults connecting to education and work, but Jobs First has played a role in that in New York City. Um, and the reason we exist and why that problem persists is that the systems that support young adults, education, workforce development, economic development, they're a little bit disconnected, and work is done by Jobs First at a systems level, really intentionally and inclusively by collaboration, to keep focus on the challenges that young people face and the ways that we can address them. And so our mission is to create and advance solutions that break down barriers and transform the system supporting young adults and their communities in the pursuit of economic opportunities. And I will pass it over to my colleague, Stephanie, to tell you more about how we do that work.
Thanks, Carrie, and good morning, everyone. It's really exciting to be here with you all today. As I mentioned at the beginning and in the chat, I am the manager of Community Inc. And I am, before we dive in, and I do see a question in the chat about defining young adults. At Jobs First, that is defined as 16 to 24-year-olds. So hopefully that answers the question. But before diving in, I definitely would love to share a little bit more about my own career journey as we're kind of learning about each other this morning. My first job was at 16 as a supermarket cashier. I did well in high school and went on to graduate from college as a first-generation student from a low-income family. So definitely did not have a car, definitely did not have the means to, get a lot of things for myself, had to apply for a lot of scholarships, and actually made it through, but struggled a little bit. And at first I thought I'd go into medicine. I ended up studying art history and philosophy and working in art galleries. In my 20s, especially in my young adult years, I freelanced and volunteered a lot, did a lot of admin work, took some management courses. I even joined the coding boot camp at one point because I thought I would break into the tech sector because that was, trending at the time, and came to realize very quickly that coding was not for me. So what I did discover in my career journey is that I love to help people. And that led me to a role as a program manager at a tech education nonprofit in the Bronx, where I was born and raised. So little did I know that that job was my entry point into workforce development, which is a field that I've now been a part of for the last 8 years. I've had the opportunity to design and manage initiatives that help young adults in their communities access economic opportunities, and that has been my way of giving back. And I share my story for 2 reasons. Again, to highlight that there really is no one size fits all to a career. It's important to keep that at top of mind when coming up with innovative solutions to address workforce needs. And also to continue to encourage you all to reflect on your own journey and what experiences or people helped you get to where you are today. I think most of us mentioned being either in a nonprofit or in research, doing community initiatives. And, it's not usually not fields that in workforce development that we hear about growing up. But there's probably some workforce development touch point that you might have had, an internship, mentorship opportunity, some brush with an employer that might have helped you learn about taking part in the workforce. So next slide. Thanks, Gary. So why workforce development? Why is it important? Quick question before we dive in. I don't want to make any assumptions. By a show of hands or maybe thumbs up emojis, how many of you are already familiar with workforce development? Awesome. Great. Okay, I see a couple of thumbs up. Thank you all. So again, some of you may have experience with it. Others may have only heard the term in passing. Either way, just wanted to provide a quick overview this morning before we explore models that JobsFirstNYC has successfully launched, to provide just a general picture. So As you might know, workforce development refers to strategies, programs, and policies that help people prepare for employment and support businesses in finding and retaining skilled workers. The workforce development ecosystem includes government agencies, educational institutions, research institutions, nonprofits, and employer partnerships. However, in some regions, employers aren't fully integrated into workforce initiatives, which can create gaps in hiring and training. So one of the key strategies of the workforce development ecosystem is its flexibility. It allows for multiple entry and exit points based on an individual's skills, experiences, and goals. It also accommodates for diverse backgrounds and career paths. It's customizable, which is great for those who may not be ready for formal education or who may have aged out of the K through 12 or post-secondary system, but still have transferable skills and need a job. The workforce development ecosystem addresses barriers that job seekers face by providing different training programs, credentialing, wraparound services. It also tackles the lack of credentials and work experience or socioeconomic challenges that a lot of folks that are unemployed might be facing. So it definitely allows for innovation in the ways that we can work together to provide those wraparound supports and resources for job seekers, especially things like childcare and transportation, which seem to be barriers in the NEPA region. Next slide. Wanted to highlight, what's in it for employers and ways that, we could really think about employer engagement in the workforce development ecosystem. So one model that illustrates this well is the New York City Career Pathways Framework, which is pictured here. This system aligns education and training with advancement opportunities for a broad range of job seekers. It shows, based on the type of job seeker and the level of education, at which point they might be entering the workforce. And that's important to keep in mind as workforce training providers, as educational institutions work directly with employers, because it really provides a win-win solution. Employers can gain access to a pipeline of job-ready workers that are trained to meet industry needs, reducing hiring and onboarding costs. Employers can also provide insight throughout this process into required credentials, certification skills, and ensuring ultimately that job seekers are truly prepared. So partnerships with employers, as you all might know or might have seeked pursuing in the past, they really help to bridge the gap between employers and job seekers from diverse backgrounds. It improves, and it's been proven to improve employee engagement, satisfaction, and job retention. Employers who engage in workforce development also help to shape industry standards and help rethink outdated hiring expectations. So for example, some companies assume that a degree is the best indicator of job readiness, but tailored workforce training programs can prove otherwise, making a strong case for skills-based hiring. Beyond business benefits, employer involvement in workforce programs strengthen local economies by creating a stronger, more resilient talent pipeline. And overall, just wanted to note that one of the biggest takeaways in this work and in the workforce development solutions that Jobs First does, that I have learned over the years, is that workforce development really is a key component of economic development. The two go hand in hand. And so, that's something to keep in mind as well when we're thinking about engaging employers and how to really make the workforce ecosystem flourish for job seekers. So I'll stop here and see if there are any thoughts that folks want to share. I see some questions in the chat as well.
So it's my question, and I'll pop up and state it. And actually, thank you, Kellen, because I'm going to call on you. Kellen is from Johnson College, and we have wonderful partnerships. And they actually have had strong partnerships with employers, and I'd love to hear, Kellen, if you can share a little bit about how those relationships were made, but I'm also curious in other industry if those same partnerships are happening.
So Johnson College has had partnerships with industry, I don't know, probably since the inception of the college. We welcome the industry to come and review our curriculum and our standards and give feedback on direction on which way we should be going with our curriculum and teaching, and what the workforce really needs. So they really like having that voice. We also, just like other college and universities, we do internships and job placement, and we have career services to help. But we stay really engaged with the industry partners, so that they can see the pipeline. Like some of the students that I oversee are middle school aged, and we get them ready to say, like, here's the training that we do. Here's the employer that will hire you when you finish the training. So what do you have to do? Finish high school, finish these classes, sign up for Johnson. So we try to make that pipeline. I did have a question for you, Stephanie, about these career pathways. It seems like on a quick Google search that when you talk about New York City's career pathways, you guys have built them out by sector. It's not just like a pathway of, all right, so you do a little job training with your unemployment office, and then you go into CUNY or SUNY, whichever they choose, and then you continue to build off of that. You actually have it divided up by, okay, you're the hospitality industry, you're the education industry. Are you going to provide a little guidance or information on how you do that?
So I see Carrie unmuted herself. I know that we did some work with the NYC Career Pathways team. So Carrie, if you wanted to share some insight.
Sure. And thanks, Stephanie. So I think what you're looking at is probably New York City's industry partnerships, and that's the framework that this model comes from. Jobs First NYC is an independent intermediary, and we'll talk about some of our approaches to this work, which is also very sector focused, with the recognition that people don't always stay in the first sector that they train in, right? Like people move around. And there's a lot of thinking about that now around upskilling and advancement. And we'll talk a little bit about that with some of our models. But New York City, when they launched this career pathways framework, it actually came out from JobsFirst, one of the models that I'll talk about in a little bit. We worked with the city and informed them about the effectiveness of that work and how some very intentional industry partnerships, support for young adults had really good outcomes. And so they designed these industry partnerships because employers tend to like to come together in industry clusters too. They learn from each other. They inform curriculum, they identify the certifications that are really most successful in preparing people for on-the-job work. And so New York City they have like a manufacturing industry partnership, a tech, a healthcare, a few others, food service, and a entertainment, I think. But yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But yes, we do recognize that people don't stay on one path.
Yeah, which I think is like kind of maybe the direction that just training and education should go in this area, because like even talking to some of our alumni, they graduate from our electronics program, but they find then they have a passion for computer science, which was just a teeny tiny bit of their educational experience in that curriculum, and then are now reviewing and coming back of like, okay, so now I need this piece of education to follow that, career or that passion that they might not have known they had. And I think it's really important. I like how it kind of, you guys are talking about this, because the younger generation needs to know it's okay to be in multiple sectors. Like it's very rare that everybody just stays in the one sector. And I've always loved the quote that your career is not a ladder anymore. It's a jungle gym. You're gonna go left, you're gonna go right, you're gonna go down. Like it's just gonna be all over the place, and you got to be okay with that.
I love that it's a jungle gym. I've heard it go from ladder to lattice, like a lattice fence, that kind of goes like that. But I love jungle gym. That feels more like my career path.
Same here. Great.
Thanks for sharing, Kellen. And I think let's keep moving.
Great. So diving into Jobs First NYC's work and how we tackle recruitment and retention challenges. So our work really focuses on breaking down barriers and building transformative solutions across 4 key areas. So we focus on community, developing localized solutions tailored to neighborhoods with high numbers of young adults that are out of school and out of work. We have education partnerships that create equitable pathways to post-secondary education and career opportunities. We use policy as a lever of on-the-ground experience and research to drive key workforce policies needed. And we also have work or sector network strategies that we have designed and advanced and that benefit both employers and workers for long-term success. So in order to make these solutions work, Jobs First NYC has developed a 5-step process that helps us identify challenges, test solutions, and scale what works. Over time, we've refined this approach to ensure that both job seekers' needs and employers' goals are met, creating partnerships that are effective and sustainable. So most of our solutions will also be iterated based on this process roadmap that you see here. We're constantly iterating on solutions based on the industry and workforce trends. And the questions that are part of our process allow for the process to continue to be customizable, adaptable to different populations, industries, and regions. So while our work started in New York City, our process can be applied anywhere to build strong, impactful partnerships. So we're constantly asking ourselves questions. And at the core of our approach is our impact framework, which you see here, which also helps our partners define, measure, and achieve meaningful outcomes. By shifting systemic practices and fostering cross-sector collaboration, we ensure that young adults and workers gain access to better education, training, and employment opportunities from the individual job seeker level all the way up to influencing policy and economic systems. So transforming systems, as you all might know, does not happen in isolation. It definitely takes a village and requires intentional, inclusive collaboration. So as a neutral convener and intermediary, Jobs First NYC has brought together over 200 partners across the workforce development ecosystem, ensuring diverse stakeholders work together towards common goals. And here's a quick snapshot of our solutions areas, our partnerships, and special initiatives, all developed over our 18 plus years of championing workforce development, some of which we will be diving in a little bit deeper into today and sharing some best practices. And quickly before we dive into those, our role as an intermediary and as a neutral convener is crucial to the ecosystem in building partnerships and developing solutions. Because it's really about building the infrastructure for those partnerships to be sustainable over time. So identifying and securing key partners in the ecosystem that will push the work forward, implementing our 5-step process that carries a partnership into fruition, supporting critical partnership elements like governance, sustainability models, providing best practices and guidance, as well as assessment plans. We are in the business of facilitating structured learning communities and design labs, and raising and leveraging resources to scale impact. So that is a little synopsis of our work. I know there were a lot of words on some of those slides, and you all might have some questions, but just wanted to take a moment before we dive into the solutions to see if anyone had any thoughts or questions. And if not, we can dive right in. Great. So as I mentioned, we'll be taking a closer look. Carrie and I will go over some of Jobs First NYC's initiatives and models. And as you think about employer partnerships and sector-based strategies for the Northeast PA region, I'll share a model that has successfully addressed employer recruitment and retention challenges in New York City, which is our Lower East Side Employment Network, or LESSEN for short. So LESSEN was formed in response to large-scale economic development and the desire to ensure local residents could benefit from the opportunities that were coming into the Lower East Side community. It's a prime example of a place-based, employer-driven partnership that aligns workforce development with community needs. This is the LESSEN model here, and the partnership's mission has been to improve workforce practices, reduce hiring costs for employers, and connect job seekers to high-demand jobs. So founded in 2007, LESSEN started as a partnership of 8 nonprofits and a community board that work together to develop and train quality candidates, strengthen employer relationships, and streamline hiring and retention processes. They knew from the beginning that having really strong employer relationships was important in order to increase job placements, both locally and for the trending jobs coming into the neighborhood, and to also improve alignment between both the workforce and the economic development side. So in that, from that perspective, LESSEN decided to create a single point of access model, as you see here, which means that, they had a dedicated partnership staff as part of the hub of LESSEN from the beginning, that acted as a central point of contact for both the workforce providers that were providing training and wraparound services for job seekers, as well as the employers that were coming into the neighborhood. The LESSEN also built relationships with local businesses that were existing in the community and tracked incoming economic development projects, any buildings or hospitality projects that were coming to the Lower East Side, to identify new job opportunities. Workforce providers and agencies that were part of the LESSEN model would then share information about their skilled, job-ready talent to the LESSEN point of access in order to make sure that any young person that was going in and out of the neighborhood that was looking for a job, that maybe needed a mentorship, internship, or wraparound service support, was provided that through any one of the agencies that were part of the LESSEN. And over time, the partnership has expanded its role to include coaching job seekers on securing and retaining employment, which in turn reduces and has reduced over time employer hiring risks and improving the interview to hire ratios for local job seekers. So what has made this model successful? Definitely 3 key things. Collaboration and trust building is one. Workforce agencies are usually really busy running programs and often don't have the capacity to step back and align their efforts. So LESSEN coordinates their work and ensures that partnerships stay effective in that process. The second thing that has made this model successful is their strong emphasis on employer engagement and preparation. As you guys heard, it was part of their mission statement from the beginning to create efficiency for local employers. And so they really champion employers being part of the process to ensure that job seekers are properly prepared. LESSEN staff and workforce agencies brief employers in advance of any job placements, which really has helped them to give employers an understanding of candidate skills, available support, and hiring benefits. And then the third thing that has really made this model successful is strategic hiring support on the LESSEN side. So again, LESSEN's partnership staff conducts research, vets decision makers at companies to streamline recruitment. They often host community-driven events such as job search parties, where employers can participate in resume reviews and mock interviews. They solicit corporate sponsors to support clothing drives for job seekers. And the network also shares resources and creates a collaborative hiring space. So this ensures that there is, again, research that's being done on the partnership level that brings the right representatives from the companies and employers in the neighborhood to these hiring events. Instead of a sales manager or engineer, there's an actual hiring manager that's present that can answer questions, that can take resumes, and just makes all of these employer touch points much more efficient. So going to the next slide, definitely want to, again, highlight that lesson success shows that when employers, workforce agencies, and community organizations collaborate together with the right structure, everyone can benefit. And so wanted to take a moment and reflect with you all on how this model might apply to NEPA. Again, this was a model that we launched in New York City. There's, different but similar challenges in our area. And so wanting to hear from you all, if you've encountered or been part of something similar to the lesson model before. I know that Kellen had shared from the school's perspective some of the career pathways that you all champion there. Wondering if there's any other examples that might be similar to lesson. That
Well,
is a reason.
right. I think technically, the idea is that point of contact is supposed to be career link. I think where the challenge is that the personalization and the understanding of walking an individual through and the support services may not be as robust as what it sounds like lesson is. So I think that is an interesting piece because, and it sounds a little bit like, and Kellen, correct me if I'm wrong, or if Terry's on here, a little bit about like similar to the RISE program where you're taking an individual and helping them get through the training and the education, but at the same time, you're providing those supports necessary to kind of remove some of the scarcity, and then sending them to a place where you know that they're going to be successful in moving forward. Is that a fair estimate of what the description is?
Yes, definitely. And so yeah, so the lesson model, it definitely allows for localized solutions because as a place-based model, we are supporting young adults within a specific set of zip codes. And so most of the employers would be walking distance or maybe a bus ride away. At the time when Lesson was founded, there were a lot of new developments coming up. And so, a lot of the data around the jobs that were available wasn't fully accessible. So it did take a lot of trial and error of what data do we need to collect, what partnerships need to be built, what questions need to be asked. And I think that, data is an important piece to all of this because even more recently, as of this year, the lesson is bringing together all of its current 9 partners and workforce agencies to develop a cross institutional data model that helps to see all of their young people and what steps they have taken and what steps they need to take in the career pathway in order to gain some of those local jobs. So it's definitely, models like this definitely are better supported by the ability to be customizable. Technology helps, but data, I think, is much more important.
So Jill, with that, the not in school or education number, has it increased or decreased? Do you know? You're on mute, my love.
Thank you. The percentage has increased, but the population of people in that age group has not. So the number I don't want to say that the number itself has grown, but the share of them has grown, if that makes sense.
And for lesson, do we know the percent of participants who were parents at the time of this process, adding childcare as an extra layer of challenge?
Carrie, I don't know if you know if that was a data point that the lesson was gathering.
I was thinking about that, Stephanie. They might gather that, but Jobs First, they don't report that to Jobs First. So we'd have to do a little sleuthing. I'm sure there's a data point somewhere, but lesson itself, as Stephanie described, it had at 1.7, 8, 9, I think now it's 9 with the community board, different nonprofit organizations. Each of those organizations collect their own set of data around who they serve, but Lesson being this very employer focused entity with that single point of contact, they probably don't collect that information as a network. It would be the individual members that collect that information.
And one of the things that I want to point out, which is for me has always been like one of the challenges. So like boroughs and neighborhoods are really well established in New York. And I feel like when we live in such a mixed region. That when we say that and we think neighborhood, if you're from Scranton, you think, well, I live in the West Side or I live in Greenridge or and I don't even know what it is in Luzerne County or whatnot. And I think in looking at these center focuses, I think it's important to think about like we have major industrial parks that are continuing to grow and are continuing to bring in business. And having a relationship and understanding what those businesses are that are coming in, which I think we have some of those contacts with the chambers and the role that they play in that. But I think having someone that's really clear about this new organization is coming in and they're bringing in 300 jobs, or recently Amazon brought in 1,500 jobs, knowing exactly what is coming into the region, what that skill set is, and then being able to inform Johnson College or, outreach or whoever's doing the job training that this is coming, this is the skill set, and we've created the partnership. Does that seem like a good translation of what lesson could possibly be in the region?
You mean our region?
Yeah,
I agree. The only thing that I keep coming to is that you're talking about 18 to 24-year-olds and we're talking about the need. We don't know how many of them have driver's licenses. We can't walk like New York City, and
right,
we know our transportation issues here. And I believe the younger generation is not getting driver's license the
correct.
day they're able to get their driver's license. They're waiting a year or two or whatever it might be. So
That in lies the one piece we need to kind of problem solve and figure out before we can solve how to get them to the jobs. It's actually physically, how do we get them to the jobs?
Yeah.
well, not even to the jobs. How are we going to get them to the community-based organizations, or how are we going to get them to the career link to get the job? Like, forget about the interviews. We can't even get them to the first two steps.
Right.
Yeah, and
And
that's a really great point. Sorry, I just wanted to note because one of the things that we were pondering about is what aspects of this model might work well or might not work well in NEPA, right? So if transportation is a big issue there, it makes a difference. A borough in New York is huge. A neighborhood, even still, might have a lot of those, as I was mentioning, because of the zip codes being the point of departure for how employers were brought into the partnerships. They might be walking distance, they might be a bus ride away, but it definitely sounds like transportation is something to really consider as a barrier in NEPA and something to solve for.
And I think in moving forward, we do have a transportation panel coming up about what are some of the challenges, but then also working with our NEPA Moves group to kind of address that and look at next steps. So as we move forward, and I think those of you who are part of NEPA Moves and part of the NEPA Moves College Forum, because we really are trying to look at those pieces. So I'll hand it back over, Steph.
Wait, one more question for you, Corinne. Are you thinking about making this by a sector? Like, are you thinking manufacturing or are you just,
So in this, I think that we're just helping with the investigation. We don't actually have a decision at the end of the day as Scranton Area Community Foundation. Certainly, we want to support our partners in that. So if the local region feels that a sector focus would make sense, then I think that that's something that we could definitively look at. But again, I think what one of the challenges is that similar to us, um, the Jobs First New York doesn't do programming per se. They fill in the gaps. We don't even fill in the gaps. We bring the people together and help them identify the gaps. So I think it's the next level of what we currently do, which is convene people around these conversations and really try and understand where does the focus of the work need to be right now. And so we know it needs to be just about everywhere. And so we're trying to do those pieces. Does that answer your question, Kellen? All right, thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. Great conversation. And just knowing that you have these sort of questions, I might skip through a little faster, but Stephanie, are you able to oh, great. You're on it.
Can you see my screen?
It just says you've started sharing. There you go. I see it now. Okay, you all know me, so we could go right to the next one. Okay, I'm going to talk about two Jobs First initiatives that also directly benefited both employers and job seekers. This first project that I mentioned earlier, the Young Adult Sectoral Employment Project, it ultimately established the most promising workforce development approach to improving how well 18 to 24-year-olds who are out of school and out of work are prepared to succeed in the workforce. Someone earlier had a question about 16 to 24-year-olds, which Stephanie mentioned is our population of focus. For 16 and 17-year-olds, most of those solutions are not what we're talking about today. Those are really our in-school interventions where we focus on, school persistence and degree attainment, high school degree attainment. So YASIP was the project that informed the city around their career pathways model that came out and some funding. It really, it's one of our work solutions, and it was the first demonstration project in the nation to test the effectiveness of adapting sector-based strategies or industry-based strategies for the employment of 18 to 24-year-olds. Before YASIP, there was not a single young adult only sector training program in the country. There were young adults in sector training programs. They weren't doing as well as their older counterparts. And so YASIP really looked at why weren't they doing as well, and are there very specific interventions that can be brought into the model to increase the success of 18 to 24-year-olds. Jobs First role in the project was supporting the development of partnerships between workforce development organizations and employers. From the very start, employers were at the design table. Each partnership focused on a specific sector, including healthcare, technology, transportation, technical theater, some others. And it carried out an employer-driven training for unemployed and underemployed young adults. The programs offered young adults enough time. This is one of the things we found. They didn't have a long enough on-ramp and enough time in preparation to master the competencies necessary for success in the workplace, while also integrating sufficient employer input to ensure that all participants who completed training programs were ready to contribute from day one on the job. They had a much easier transition. Next slide. So this is probably small and hard to read, but we will share the deck afterward. We designed and led a 6-month planning period, Jobs First, that featured sectoral employment experts and youth development experts. And like I said, we couldn't bring in like young adult sector training experts because there weren't any at the time. So that's where we brought in these. There were really strong youth development, positive youth development approaches that existed across the country. And there were really strong sector training programs. We looked at Perscolis, which is a tech training program started in the Bronx. It's now national. We looked at Wisconsin Regional Training Program in manufacturing, and we looked at JVS Boston in healthcare, and we brought people from all of those organizations to New York City to talk about what was working, while also bringing youth development experts to the table to talk about what worked best for young adults to succeed in job training programs. And Jobs First role was a technical assistance provider. We actually raised and leveraged resources from private philanthropy to give planning grants. We developed training and curriculum, and we brought more employers to the table to talk about their industries and deepen employer relationships. Next slide. These were the workforce development partners that were at the table. And also actually WCS is the Wildlife Conservation Society, which is an employer of more than 600 young adults in the Bronx at the Bronx Zoo, and they run the Central Park Zoo, the Brooklyn Aquarium. They're a seasonal employer, but because they employed so many young adults, seasonal employment isn't really thought of as a sector strategy. I'll tell you a partnership that kind of came out of that. But they employed so many young adults in a first job experience that we wanted to help them think about career pathways. We developed 11 sector employment partnerships across 7 industries that improved employment outcomes for young workers through targeted sector skills training. YASIP improved the effectiveness. It increased the scale of services for young adults enrolled in those programs, including young adult specific caseworkers, peer mentors, an older, an adult mentor, things that we know really help young adults thrive. And it developed and enhanced workforce and employer relationships in sectors that are really most accessible to young adults without 4-year degrees. And ultimately, it affected systems change, changing the way New York City looked at its career pathways and the way that it funded young adult workforce development. Next slide. From this work, and with many of the top workforce development agencies in New York City and some now national that I mentioned, like Perscolis, 10 new sector training programs launched in healthcare, green jobs, technology, transportation and logistics, culinary, and technical theater. And then the one that makes that 11th partnership was led by the Wildlife Conservation Society, and I'll talk about that seasonal talent model. 2,335 young adults were served by these partnerships. More than $15 million was raised and invested in the partnerships over time to launch the models that they designed in YASIP. And one really important statistic was that retention for young adults was really low going into these types of workforce environments. And we found that the 1-year retention in YASIP models increased what was hovering around, at best between 40-50% to 75%. And like I said, following the success of YASIP, New York City proposed the Career Pathways model. It launched the industry partnerships, and state and federal policy supporting sector-based strategies was rolled out. Next slide. So YASIP, I don't know if I mentioned, we launched that in 2013. And over time, following really strong results of these sort of niche sector training programs that at best, only serve a few hundred young adults a year, and then seeing the negative impact of the pandemic on the workforce, we wanted to scale the project. And through the 12 years since YASIP launched, sector training programs have become much more the norm, partnering with industry, really making sure there are jobs at the end, that you're working with employers to understand the skills they need. We wanted to scale the impact of these smaller sector training programs and increase the number of people that could benefit. And we worked with now groups of leading nonprofits, and we're doing this work now, and employers in a range of industries and sectors to build citywide sector networks. Those networks have the goals you see here on the slide, expanding effective skills training, strengthening the collective mechanism of these nonprofits to partner with employers and attract more employers to the table by really customizing training that meets the targeted demand, and to increase employment opportunities and wages for job seekers. Next slide. I'm going to go kind of quickly through the three. The Green Economy Network, it was launched through our 5i partnership development process that Stephanie described earlier. Actually, all three sector networks went through that 5i process. And for the Green Economy Network, there were actually hundreds of partners that came together for 18 months. It launched, it wasn't planned, but it ended up launching right at the start of the pandemic and went from a completely in-person process to a virtual process. And I think that actually attracted much more people to join. People wanted to learn about the Green Economy Network. They were able to do that virtually. We were all homebound. And so these partners together are now, it's scaled down to more like 25 partners. They establish effective practices, align current systems to create green jobs and career paths, and they are prioritizing access and sustainability. These are the core partners that are at the table now, but like I said, it was hundreds of partners that came together for that 18-month process. And they have now a shared set of goals to assess the green economy, improve their collective understanding of the challenges and opportunities in the green economy and the pathways, connect workforce developers with employers, and facilitate a faster transition to a green future. Next slide. So you could read the accomplishments there. I won't go over that, but in addition to that, they launched the partnership about a year and a half ago now. And during that time, they've hosted more than a dozen forums that feature policymakers, large energy employers, heads of unions, offshore wind, solar, more heads of those companies and industries. They've hosted they designed and hosted a young adult survey that has surveyed more than 200 young adults to really understand what they know about the green economy and their interest in the green economy. The survey results were very interesting. That showed 70% of young adults had a very high interest in the green economy. And then on a converse question, 70% of them indicated they were not sure what the jobs in the green economy were. So to me, that presents an enormous opportunity around education. They designed and launched an interactive systems map that's hosted on an open source platform called Kumu, KUMU.io. It's a data visualization tool, and it showcases the green economy stakeholders in New York City. And they created a comprehensive policy agenda that was submitted to the mayor's office when Mayor Adams came into office, and they tracked the legislation against that policy agenda. Next slide. The healthcare sector network, which we presented on last week, if any of you were on that session, some of this is repetitive, but they are also a collective, a smaller collective. They strengthen workforce development and partner with employers to meet labor demand. They collaborate to ensure equitable access and opportunity within the healthcare sector. And they have a goal of creating family-sustaining career pathways, because entry points in healthcare are pretty low wage, but very, very high demand, which you saw from Jill's presentation also. Next slide. So there's 8 nonprofits. There's a community college. Down at the bottom there, you see those are some large healthcare system employers in New York City, and the 1199 union are all working together to strengthen employer partnerships and cross-institution sharing and referral of clients. That all of these partnerships want a sort of no wrong door approach, where if somebody walks into your nonprofit, they're not a fit for you or your training, they can refer you to a nonprofit partner. And they sort of, all of them also think about that lesson type of model where to employers, they're one unit, and employers, don't necessarily need to be overburdened by partnering with 8 different nonprofits. They want more and better jobs for their clients, and through employer hiring, they've improved employer hiring and retention practices. And next slide. In their first year of implementation, they've trained more than 100 individuals together on top of who they individually train, and supported them in earning industry recognized credentials. They hosted a Careers in Care Expo with more than 100 attendees, employers, and training organizations coming together to expose young adults in a hospital setting, in a hospital ballroom, actually, to careers in healthcare. And they've mapped upskilling opportunities in new in-demand career pathways that really do reach that family sustaining wage. One example is surgical technicians, which in New York City, the average wage is around $75,000, which is a big jump from home health aides and certified medical assistants, which are the entry points in healthcare, which pay in the, at best, low 40s. And they've worked with the large healthcare systems, Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, Montefiore, and the Union, as I mentioned. Next one. Okay, our tech sector network. I'll take a break after this one for questions. It's made up of 5 leading tech training providers. It's the smallest one, but they all are really deeply involved in the tech sector, working with employers. They promote skills-based hiring, which in tech, you can actually achieve 6-figure jobs right out of training. Without a 4-year degree. Some of our partners train in software development and are placing people in 6-figure jobs. They are expanding skilling and upskilling opportunities to increase New Yorkers across all 5 boroughs access to high-wage tech jobs and advance economic mobility. Next slide. These are the 5 partners. They are envisioning their mission vision is an inclusive and thriving tech industry with accessible and market-driven training that leads to economic opportunity. And they've also had great outcomes that you see here. In addition to that, in their first 1.5 years of implementation, they have systematized cross-network referrals through a live event that they called Draft Day, which was really cool. I've never seen anything like it in our sector. These organizations that used to see each other as competitors are now really collaborative, and they're working to formalize and streamline this process digitally right now. They've integrated durable or soft skills or human skills, however you refer to them, into partner programming as a hallmark to tech training, which wasn't always standard. And they've held young adult employer focus group sessions, and they are applying the learnings from those sessions to deepen and advance the partnership. And like I mentioned, they're building a digital, because they're the tech sector, which isn't surprising. One of them is attempting to build a digital no wrong door approach that allows interested tech training seekers to find the right fit tech training in one platform. Okay, I've said a lot. We could go to discussion. You could take the deck down so I could see folks here. I'd love to hear if anyone has questions, thoughts, ideas, what resonates with you. Is there anything like this in NEPA? Are you thinking about things like this?
What I'm curious about and kind of where my head goes to in all of this is that truthfully, the idea of a 6-figure career or what a career path looks like technically should be starting in our K through 12 right? So exposure to it. And one of the things that um, I've heard over time from educators and from nonprofits is it's also getting parents on board that a 4-year degree is not the only path, or that you have to work in fast food the rest of your life if you choose to just graduate and move on. And so in that, I think that we have, again, wonderful workforce development programs and trainings, and certainly need like that pathway from those programs into the occupations. But I also think that there needs to be a pathway from I'm in 6th grade and I think that this is what I want to do, and getting that connection and that piece of it that I think is really where I feel like when I was a kid growing up, I was going to be a teacher, and gosh darn it, didn't I become a teacher, right? And so in that, like a lot of educators right now are saying like kids are just trying to get out of school and not thinking about next steps. So in this, like I can see capturing someone from that 18 to 24-year-old range who's ready to move on and get those supports, but in capturing them, I feel like we're not capturing them young enough. And most of these programs, it seems, are focused on that 18 to 24-year-old range. So that's just me throwing out my 2 cents.
Absolutely, Corin. You're 100% right. The models that we're talking about right now are in recognition of, it's going to be a strong word, but of failures of the K-12 system. That, they've graduated a lot of students that walk into the doors of our nonprofit workforce development partners with anywhere from 4th to 9th grade math and reading levels. And it's, I don't even want to go down that road because it makes me angry, right? Because you have an education system that's funded with lots of money, and the workforce development system is funded with a fraction of that money. And the workforce development system is often at the mercy of, private philanthropy also, because the federal and state dollars are so small. And it makes me so angry that they are held to some standard of training and placing people in jobs when the education system has failed so many young adults. Right. If you're coming to the door of workforce development and you can't read or write at the level you need to even enter a workforce development training program. And that's why we have this range of sectors that include transportation and logistics, because that is a pathway for people that never make it to an 11th, 12th grade math reading level. And then on the other end, the tech programs, like you have to have a 11th grade minimum math reading level to succeed in the training, most likely, right? So they use that as a screening mechanism. But yes, 100% you are right. There are other models and approaches that Jobs First has in our what we call our education solutions, but it's all connected. This is all connected. But yeah, what are the earlier interventions? And I just want to address something else you said, and I might skip some of my other slides because we're a small group and I'd rather you go to conversation that you want to have too, Corin. You mentioned earlier exposure, right? Like how are young people even getting to the doors of the green economy, training programs? And I mentioned that survey that we did, and it was people, I think ages 16 and up to maybe 29 filled in that survey. And, to see that data that so many are intrigued by the green economy. It's new, it's exciting. They want to be change makers. They want to be part of, rescuing the earth, and making sure it's around for them. But then in that same question, we said, what occupations in the green economy are you aware of or interested in? And so few knew, because to the point of like, what are they learning in the school system? So we have done some work with the New York City school system in mapping out green pathways. They are thinking about how to integrate that across school systems. And we've worked, the New York City school systems has seven what they call industry commissions, where they have employers that partner with the
Right.
school system to bring in exposure and mentorship and different sort of, they do a career week. There are things they're thinking about how to more intentionally expose people younger.
So I will say that the PA Department of Education does require career benchmarks that need to be met from kindergarten through 12th grade. One of the things that I hear though is let's say I was born and raised in the area and I wanted to be a teacher my whole life, and I went to school and I became a teacher my whole life, and I didn't even know the amazing manufacturing that's going on in this area. How am I supposed to talk to a child about these amazing career opportunities when I don't know what I don't know? And I think that's a lot of the challenge around here is everything's the best kept little secret. We have an amazing hospitality industry. And some amazing things happening that we have amazing manufacturing going on up here. And so I think it's the idea of you can grow up and find sustaining wage jobs, but like the path is, because we have, you know, Johnson does great work, and Luzerne learns to work, and Skills in Scranton, and WVIA is launching these pieces. But, how does the pipeline go younger? And I think that's one of the pieces that um, really needs to be thought about and flushed out in this area. And if someone disagrees or thinks differently, please speak up, because it's only from conversations with all of you that I come at this.
So Corin, I'll just jump in. So Johnson College, we have an after-school STEM program for 8 of the local middle schools to engage them in occupational or learning that is not taught in the K through 12 sector, usually because they have to teach to the standardized tests. So we give them a little bit different so that hopefully by the time they hit middle school, they can make the educational decision of this is the path I want to be on, and that's the career I want to go into. So we launched that probably 3 years ago, and now we have hit every middle school in probably Lackawanna County. So I agree with the whole younger population. We also do activities with the Everhart Museum, and we do activities with all the local libraries so that we hit the homeschooling population or the cyber school population that's in our area. So we do a lot of that middle school. Stephanie and Carrie, I mean, I jotted down like a million notes and directions in which I think programming could be fine-tuned here at my institution. My question though for you is, because you talk a lot about that you are the data agents and the change agents for New York City, are you using Department of Labor money? Are you using money from DCED? Are you using money from your mayor? Or is this WIOA, Title II, or just philanthropy in general?
Are you asking for Jobs First to do our work, or for the partnerships to do their work, or both?
For the partnership